I'm Kay, a part-time housewife, aged 48. My husband, Ethan, who is 2 years older than me, and I have been living a peaceful life since we were unable to have children. However, a year ago, Ethan's parents, John and Susan, suddenly arrived at our house with a load of household goods, announcing their company had gone bankrupt. John, who had built a successful business from scratch, had been gradually losing customers to overseas manufacturers over the last few years, leading to the bankruptcy. They were in debt by about $500,000 and had to sell their high-rise apartment. Even the apartment that Ethan's brother, who was the vice president of the company and was living with his wife, was sold. Having nowhere else to go, John and Susan asked if they could live with us. We were living in a spacious house within walking distance of a train station, originally built by my father. We moved in after he passed away due to illness, and my mother returned to her family home in the countryside. Given the circumstances and the fact that John and Susan had always been good to us, I was inclined to agree immediately. They had helped significantly with our wedding expenses, shared gifts like birthdays and Christmas presents they received at John's company, and often brought us luxury brand accessories as souvenirs from their overseas trips. It felt wrong not to help them in their time of need. But Ethan strongly advised against it, saying, "We shouldn't live together. I'll somehow pay for an apartment for them." He warned me, "I don't want to speak ill of my parents, but their sense of normalcy is off. They'll end up hurting you, Kay." I didn't fully understand his meaning, but it made me anxious. Before we could decide, frustrated by our delay, John and Susan moved in with all their belongings. It took me less than a month to realize Ethan was right. Firstly, John and Susan used to live in a spacious high-rise apartment, so they had a lot of furniture, appliances, clothes, and hobby items. They brought all of that with them and have now taken over the second floor of our house. They even demanded high-quality air conditioning for all the rooms on the second floor, citing the value of their belongings. Then, they started criticizing the food I cooked, down to the ingredients. Store-brand milk? That might upset my stomach. We always shopped at department stores. Oh no. Meat with a discount sticker, and it's not even imported. We only eat high-quality beef. If I followed their wishes, our household's food expenses would double or triple. Despite their constant complaints, Ethan and I had to resort to making budget-friendly meals for ourselves and more luxurious dishes for John and Susan. Of course, Ethan scolded them, assuring me, "You don't have to give in to their demands." But when he wasn't around, they would lament, "Oh dear, are we going to starve to death?" John and Susan even spread rumors to the neighbors, saying, "Our daughter-in-law only feeds us terrible food." So, I couldn't just ignore their complaints. Once, I suggested, "Why don't you cook your meals yourselves?" "Oh, we had a maid for that." "Cooking is such a menial task," they replied. Menial? Cooking is a menial task? Despite their frequent visits to fancy restaurants with renowned chefs, they dared to say that. The biggest issue was Susan's obsession with luxury fashion. She constantly wanted to buy expensive brand underwear and clothes, like panties for $150, and would unashamedly ask me to buy them. I couldn't help but say, "Susan, at your age, you won't be showing them to anyone." She became furious, yelling, "What a lewd thought. High-end lingerie is a status symbol for the elite." And I thought, "You're not elite anymore." The best word to describe them would probably be a nouveau riche. It's admirable that they succeeded through hard work from humble beginnings. However, flaunting wealth and status, and trying to maintain superiority even after losing everything, isn't the behavior of truly upper-class people. They continued to make unreasonable demands. "I've ordered premium steak. You'll pay, right?" "I didn't get any for you too, so it's cheaper," they said, leaving me a bill for $200 for just their 2 servings. When Ethan had to switch his favorite beer to a cheaper sparkling wine, they criticized sparkling wine. Such a terrible drink. Only for the poor, and guzzled expensive beer delivered from a nearby liquor store. No amount of money would be enough at this rate. Moreover, Ethan was planning to start a company with a colleague, so almost all our savings accumulated since our marriage were gone. With my part-time salary, I can't cover the living expenses of 2 spendthrifts. I've been dipping into my savings from my single days. but now, that savings is nearly depleted. So, I decided to serve a dinner made with inexpensive soy meat and vegetables like bean sprouts. I've reached my limit. Please, John and Susan, get a job and contribute some money, I appealed. Suddenly, John threw the meal away, shouting at Ethan, I can't eat this. Are you trying to make us old folks work? This evil, incompetent daughter-in-law is no good. Ethan, find a rich new wife. Please leave. This is our house. How dare you call Kay evil and incompetent? The failures here are you too. Get out. Ethan retorted angrily. However, John and Susan didn't seem fazed and quickly retreated upstairs, saying spitefully, we're being manipulated by such a terrible daughter-in-law. What's hers is ours. But I couldn't let them walk all over us any longer. I decided to consult my mother in the countryside. And she came up with a brilliant plan. I shared my mother's plan with Ethan and booked a 2-night, 3-day hot spring tour for John and Susan. I'm sorry for overstepping my bounds, John and Susan. I've reflected on it. As an apology, I've booked a luxurious hot spring hotel for 2 nights. Would you like to go? Their eyes lit up, and they eagerly accepted the invitation. Just as planned. Upon returning from their trip, John and Susan screamed when they entered their room on the 2nd floor. What is this? All our stuff is gone. Whose luggage is this? They found unfamiliar furniture, appliances, and clothes. Smiling, I explained from behind them. They belong to my mother. She's moving in today to live on the 2nd floor. Your belongings are no longer in this house. After my father's death, my mother had moved back to her family home in the countryside. But I had called her to explain the situation and asked if she could stay with us for about a month. My mother, who hates injustice, I thought, might be able to get John and Susan to behave. Then, to my surprise, my mom said, I'm tired of living in the countryside and have been thinking about moving back. If Ethan agrees, I might just move there again. Really? That's wonderful. But the 2nd floor is occupied by them. I'm sorry, but you might have to sleep in the dark room on the 1st floor. That's fine. I'll move into the 2nd floor right away. She said with a smile, teaching me how to evict John and Susan. The plan was to force them out. We timed their trip with my mother's move, hired movers to take their belongings out of the 2nd floor. And then brought in my mother's things. What are you doing? This is our room. We'll sue you for trespassing. John and Susan shouted. Calmly, my mother replied. You seem to be mistaken. This house is in my name, and I only allowed my daughter Kay and her husband Ethan to live here. The trespassers are you. Indeed, according to my father's will, the house was in my mother's name, not mine. Learning the truth, John and Susan turned pale. But Kay said we could live here. Susan desperately argued. I never said such a thing. You forced yourselves in here. Then why have we been living here? If you didn't kick us out, it means we can stay. But my mother remained unfazed by her words. I have a rental agreement with my daughter Kay. Even if she said you could stay, without my permission as the landlord, you have no right to live here. My diligent mother had us sign a rental agreement even though we're family, to keep things proper. Unless you two have contributed even a fraction of the rent from your own pockets, I might consider it. But in reality, you've not paid any rent, let alone living expenses. That's because the company went bankrupt and we had debts. The debts were settled with the sale of your and your eldest son's apartments. You're receiving pensions, aren't you? Why haven't you paid anything? As my mother logically cornered them, they turned ashen and looked down. Looking down at them, I gave the final declaration. Your belongings have been moved to a spacious monthly apartment near the station. It costs $2,000 a month. I'll cover the first month and the moving costs, but I won't be involved any further. Then, John and Susan turned to Ethan, pleading. Ethan, you wouldn't abandon us, would you? Think of all we've done for you. It's time to repay us. Ethan put on a pained expression. I'd like to help, but I've quit my job. I've used up all my savings, I can't afford to help you too. Indeed, Ethan had an obligation to help his parents, but only if he was financially capable. You can't get blood from a stone. Hearing this, John and Susan were completely despondent. Their eyes unfocused, but soon Susan remembered her eldest son, the former vice president, and begged him over the phone to let them stay. They were promptly rejected. I later heard that the company's downfall was partly due to clients favoring overseas manufacturers, but more so due to John and Susan misusing company funds for investments and lavish purchases. Finally, John and Susan, in tears, left for the monthly apartment in a taxi Ethan called. They sold furniture, appliances, Susan's clothes, and jewelry to barely afford a small apartment. They occasionally asked Ethan for money, but live modestly on your pension, and you should manage, he firmly replied. All our pension goes to paying debts. Susan wailed over the phone. Apparently, the debt was due to their continued spending habits even after moving. There was no saving them. 2 years have passed, and Ethan's business with his colleague is finally taking off. I assist him with my fast typing skills and enjoy peaceful days relishing my mother's cooking. I'm Nancy. Until recently, my husband and I were living with my in-laws, but we've finally managed to end that living arrangement. The reason was the typical conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. It's not that I always had a bad relationship with my mother-in-law, Susan. We had a fairly good relationship. Since my husband, Kevin, is the eldest son, he had mentioned from the beginning of our marriage that we might end up living with my parents. Asking what I thought about it, I reluctantly agreed, saying, well, it can't be helped, but ensure our privacy is respected. However, after we got married, my father-in-law, Peter, fell seriously ill and had to be hospitalized for a long time. With no prospect of returning to work, he had to quit his job. As for Susan, she had been a stay-at-home wife and had never worked before. Additionally, Kevin has a much younger brother, Steve, who is still a college student. He lives far away, on his own, and needs financial support. Peter and Susan's financial situation became quite difficult. When my husband discussed it with me, we could have just provided financial help to Susan. However, Susan strongly insisted, you two are planning to live with us in the future, aren't you? So why not start living together now? Our apartment lease was up for renewal, and my in-laws' house, which they had been renting for many years, was quite old. Given the circumstances, I reluctantly agreed, but I insisted on having separate toilets, bathrooms, and kitchens. We ended up living in a 2-family house, with us on the 2nd floor and Peter and Susan on the 1st. This was crucial for privacy and because of my work. Actually, I'm a freelance illustrator working from home. Not to brag, but I'm quite successful. In fact, I earn more than Kevin, who works at the city hall. But with this comes constant work, and when I was single, I often worked through the night. I needed this setup to ensure enough sleep and family time and to maintain my work pace. However, it seems Susan wasn't too happy about this arrangement from the start. She used to complain to Kevin when I wasn't around, but since he didn't pay much attention, she confronted me directly. Why did you make it a 2-family house? I thought it was her wish for us to live together. It made no sense to me. Turns out, she had assumed traditional living arrangements where only the bedrooms are separate. In her mind, there was no need for 2 households. I, as the wife, should be doing all the household chores. It's a waste of money. 2 entrances, 2 sets of utilities, it's just extravagant. She believed a normal, large single-family house would have been more spacious and luxurious. But Peter and Kevin decided this, I said. Though it was my wish, they were the ones who made the final decision. Susan firmly believes her views are common sense and doesn't accept anything contrary to her beliefs. She never bothered to check the floor plan, assuming it would be just as she imagined. But the house was already built, there was nothing we could do about it. Yet, her anger didn't subside. She raged, this is not living together. Nancy tricked me and demanded that I do all the household chores for both our house and hers. Excuse me? Aren't you a stay-at-home wife? It was a genuine question, not sarcasm, but it only added fuel to the fire. Peter was in long-term hospital care, and she only visited him about once every 2 weeks. Why should I take care of everything, including her share, when she's not working? And if finances were tight, she could work part-time. She furiously retorted, your job is just an amateur's playtime. How dare you live off my son's earnings? It's hurtful to have your work belittled, even in an argument. Well, actually, I paid for this house with my savings, I said. Who would believe such a lie? Oh, how unfortunate that my son married such an incompetent wife. When Kevin came home and I told him about what happened, he sighed. I've explained countless times that it was your savings that paid for the house. Mom just doesn't listen to anything that doesn't suit her. I'll talk to her again, but Nancy, just ignore her, okay? Some time passed, and then my mother-in-law came over again. Nancy, I'm sorry. I got a stern talking to from Kevin. I just lost my temper, she said, apologizing meekly, a stark contrast to her previous behavior. No, I should be the one apologizing, I replied. I was internally moved, thinking she might not be as bad as I thought, given her straightforward apology. Actually, I have a favor to ask you. It's a job. And there's proper payment for it, she continued. She said she got an illustration job for me through someone she knew, as a way to make amends with me. Honestly, I was swamped with work and taking on more was tough. But, fearing it might create friction, I reluctantly accepted it. After several days and nights of hard work, I was handed a shockingly low payment of $20, with Susan cheerfully saying. They were really pleased with it. I blame myself for not asking how much I'd be paid, but given the official-looking order form she gave me, I expected a fair market rate. Naturally, I was quite disappointed and ended up venting to my husband when he returned from work. Something's off. I have friends at that company. I'll ask around, he said and immediately contacted them. I'm sorry, Nancy. My mom pocketed the money, he revealed. The company had actually paid $1,000. My husband was furious and confronted Susan, but she was unapologetic. What? It's just a handling fee. Besides, you guys don't support my living expenses, and Nancy doesn't do any housework, so I deserve it. My husband and I were dumbfounded. Charging a family member a fee? Then at least you should be the one getting $20. And what's this about housework? Mom. Don't trouble Nancy anymore. I thought anyone caught in such wrongdoing would sever ties, but Susan was different. Bold or maybe even brazen. Then, when Peter was about to be discharged from the hospital, she demanded, as if it were natural, that I take care of him. Though I work from home, I'm still working. I could help occasionally, but daily care was impossible, so I refused. She exploded, why can't you help with the caregiving? A wife who talks back like Nancy is useless. Divorce her, she continued. Even when our baby was born, she said, the baby doesn't look cute like Nancy. Is the child really my son's? Don't count on me for any help. Mom, enough is enough. I was furious, but my husband was absolutely livid. This led us to a state of Cold War. Even though we lived under the same roof, there was no interaction at all. She didn't take care of our child, let alone show any affection. For instance, when our child couldn't go to daycare because of a fever. Or when I was busy with work deadlines. She never helped, no matter how much trouble we were in, but I actually felt more at ease. It meant no inconvenience for us. In this way, 10 years flew by in a blink. Our family and Susan remained estranged, with our child now in 4th grade and Kevin's brother, Steve, who was in college when we married. Now employed and married himself. Peter had fully recovered and started working again a few years ago. Susan, as usual, seemed to badmouth me in front of everyone. As a result, Peter and Steve's family think I'm some kind of monstrous wife. It was my sister-in-law, Steve's wife, who had been closely observing my relationship with Susan. And she's quite the character. She ingratiated herself with Susan by joining in on the badmouthing. Maybe Susan dotes on her conspicuously, thinking it will make me jealous. My sister-in-law, Emily, getting along with Susan, gets treated to meals out, receives clothes and accessories. And gets help with her newborn child. She even got all sorts of baby items like clothes, toys, strollers, and baby baths. And how do I know this? Because Emily comes over to our house and boasts about it all the time. Nancy, you really don't know how to play your cards right. You should learn to use the situation to your advantage, or you'll lose out. She said snidely. After all, marrying the eldest son was your first mistake. Wouldn't it be easier like me, married to the younger son? Well, since you live together, there's no need for us to worry about caregiving, she added. Emily was way too overconfident. Kevin had been fed up with Susan and Emily for quite some time. I can't stand even seeing Mom anymore. Let's end this cohabitation, he said. Even though we had no interactions, we still occasionally ran into each other. Every time Susan saw Kevin, she would urge him to divorce me. Now that Peter had started working again and Susan was financially comfortable enough to lavish gifts for Emily, the original reason for our living together was gone. There's also a land acquisition offer for road expansion. It might be a good time, he mentioned. Our house was involved in a land acquisition for road expansion, even though we hadn't finished paying off the mortgage yet. With a substantial compensation on offer, we decided to demolish the house and end the cohabitation. Mom says she wants to live with someone who isn't heartless like us, and someone like my brother and his wife. So let them take care of her, Kevin declared. Susan was unaware of Emily's true nature. Emily always acted sweetly in front of Steve. He, convinced that we were the bad ones, had apparently offered to take care of their poor mother. You're not like that nasty sister-in-law. You get along well with Mom, so you'll manage, he told his wife. Caught off guard, Emily panicked. She just wanted to maintain her easiest position without revealing her true colors or being burdened with future caregiving. The next day, Emily confronted me, almost in tears. Why does our family, being the younger sons, have to live with them? You should take care of them until the end. And now you're demolishing the house? Why can't you just hand over the duplex to us, she demanded. Why? Because you're too well liked. You're smarter than me, aren't you? And about the house and land, they were bought with my savings. And they're involved in a land acquisition, I explained. Liar. Mom never said anything like that, she exclaimed, shocked. But of course, Susan wouldn't tell her anything that didn't suit her. Also, we've already paid a considerable amount for Peter's hospital bills. We've kept all receipts and recorded everything in proper ledgers. So, Kevin and Peter have already agreed that our duty to support them in their old age is fulfilled. It's your turn now, I added. What? You can't be serious. After the incident with Susan pocketing money, Kevin and I had become very cautious. Susan constantly sent us bills for various expenses. While we kept food costs separate, all other expenses like utilities and neighborhood association fees were on us. Afterward, piecing together the story from Emily's tearful phone calls, they ended up in a living arrangement where, due to Susan's strong insistence and budget constraints, everything except the bedrooms was shared. Peter and Steve thought there wouldn't be any issues since Susan and Emily got along well. After moving in together, Susan demanded they cover living expenses, arguing, "We're old and don't have much time left." Just like when they lived with us, she didn't contribute to utilities. She also refused to contribute to any living expenses, including food, as they ate together. Moreover, Susan fell down the stairs in the new house, injuring her back and requiring care. Frustrated by her limited mobility, she began taking it out on Emily. Suddenly, the care and financial support she thought were none of her concern became her burden. And with no help with the children and being the target of her outbursts, it was too much for her. Their relationship with Susan soured quickly. Steve and Emily argued fiercely, with him asking, "Why can't you get along with Mom?" Their marital relationship deteriorated. Peter, who had ignored the issues between me and Susan, continued to turn a blind eye. However, he ended up getting injured by a plate thrown by Emily during one of their fights. This led to a long hospital stay. Meanwhile, Steve, struggling in his personal life, made a significant mistake at work and had to do overtime every day to resolve the issue. Their family was in the midst of collapse. Given the characters of Susan and Emily, it seemed likely there would be more trouble, but it was no longer my concern. We had fulfilled our obligations and blocked their calls. Our family is now living peacefully and happily in a condominium in the neighboring town. free from years of problems.